Hello everyone, welcome back to another Minecraft video. I'm still in my living room. I don't have Gus with me anymore. His family came back, so I am no longer dog sitting him, but I'm still here in my living room just because I'm uncomfortable and just trying to make myself more comfortable. I'm still talking low. This video will be of my Nintendo 64 game collection. It is considerably smaller than my other collections, and there's a couple good reasons why. The first reason is that the Nintendo 64 has a lot of demand. There's a lot of demand for Nintendo 64 games, so prices are very expensive. The other reason is because in comparison to a lot of other video game systems, the Nintendo 64 has a relatively small library. The Wikipedia page for the Nintendo 64, I believe, lists about 400 games in all for the Nintendo 64, and that's across all regions, meaning that's all including all the games that only came out in Japan, all of the games that only came out in the United States, it counts all the exclusives, region exclusive games. So it's a very small library. In fact, I've seen listings for a full North American collection. I've seen listings for about like $7,000, which actually is not a lot, considering that's every single Nintendo 64 game that is region specific to the United States, I guess, or North America. I already counted them before I started recording this. I have 28. In comparison, my NES library, I think I have 69. My PS2 collection comes out to around 67 games, and yeah, Game Boy Advance was about 60 some as well. So 28's a lot smaller number in comparison. Now, my history with the console is pretty small, a pretty small history, because growing up, I only had one friend that owned a Nintendo 64, and I only remember playing 2 games on it, and that was Super Mario 64 and Turok. And it wasn't until probably close to 20 years after the Nintendo 64 released did I actually own one. The only other experience I had with the Nintendo 64 before I owned one myself was the orthodontist I went to growing up, where my sister got her braces and where I got my braces. They had one of those, I guess, display whatever machines that were embedded in the wall, and it was a Nintendo 64, and on it was Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Kids that were at the orthodontist that had to wait could play Nintendo 64 there. And so I did. So yeah, really the only 3 games that I played for probably the first 20 years of the Nintendo 64's existence was Super Mario 64, Turok, and Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. I think I got my Nintendo 64 back in 2016, 2017, which was not that long ago, but it was right before prices really started to go up. So I was really fortunate to grab all these games when they were relatively cheap. Some of the games I have have at least doubled in value since I bought them. And so I'm glad I did. I'm glad I bought them when I did. The GameCube is very similar to the Nintendo 64 in the sense that it has a relatively small library, and it didn't do quite well sales-wise, but the GameCube was really what I grew up on. So that's why I never really had much of an experience with a Nintendo 64. And because the PlayStation totally outsold the Nintendo 64, I feel like that's why I had a lot more experiences with the PlayStation than I did the Nintendo 64. So we'll just go ahead and get right into the games. The first couple games I have are in the B category. The first one, you probably guessed it. It is Banjo-Kazooie. Let me get some good lighting on there. It's the evening right now, and I just have a few lamps in this room and then the sunlight coming in. So it's going to be a little bit more moody. But there is Banjo-Kazooie. All of the rare platforming games I have here, I have not played, because I didn't really play a Nintendo 64 growing up, except at that one friend's house. And again, I already said the games that I played. So this is a cult classic. Recently added to Smash Bros. Like 2 years ago, and everybody freaked out, and I was excited for it as well because I was excited for other people. The next game, the last B game, I only have 2 B games, and you've probably guessed this one too. It is the sequel, Banjo-Tooie. And I have not played this one either. Banjo-Kazooie, I feel like, was really the game that really started the mascot 3D collectathon platformer. Super Mario 64 was... You can argue that was the first one, but I don't know. I think Mario's in a totally different camp there. I think Banjo-Kazooie was really probably the first one. That really started the trend. You probably guessed which game I'm going to talk about for the letter C, and it's Conker's Bad Fur Day. I was very smart, and I got this game a few years ago when it was at a reasonable price to get. I haven't really played this game too much. I tried playing it on an emulator, and I think I tried playing it on BizHawk or EmuHawk, and the controls just did not feel correct. Specifically the analog controls, and I had that same issue with Super Mario 64. I also tried Project 64, and I had the same issues. There's just I tried tweaking it the best I knew how to. I don't know, the analog controls just didn't feel right. They felt locked in 4 or 8 directions. It didn't feel like true analog control. But yeah, Conker's Bad Fur Day, rated M. All of it's this game is not intended for kids. Goodness. That I'm sure most of us are familiar with. For the letter D, I actually have these games out of alphabetical order, so you're going to have to forgive me, but I only have 4 of them, so does it really matter? The first one I have here is Duke Nukem 0 Hour. Duke Nukem, as you are probably aware, is one of your boomer shooters. I like to classify first-person shooters in 4 different categories. I don't know if gaming historians will agree with me, but you have your boomer shooters that are like the Wolfensteins and the Dooms and the Duke Nukems. The ones that have a raycasted 2D engine. If you weren't aware, Doom and Wolfenstein, those old games are actually two-dimensional games. It just uses some very clever rendering trickery to make it look 3D. And that's why you were able to have first-person shooters come out on Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance and, at PC and stuff like that at the time. Duke Nukem 0 Hour, I'm not totally certain where it lies. I should say so you have the boomer shooters, which is what I described. Then you have, I would call the medieval era of first-person shooter games, which is pretty much any game between the boomer shooter and Halo Combat Evolved. I say that because Halo Combat Evolved became the standard for first-person shooter games after it came out. Every single game on consoles, first-person shooters, they all controlled like Halo after Halo came out. Halo was also a true third or 3D environment game. Anything including Combat Evolved and after Combat Evolved, I would consider just modern first-person shooter games. And then you have kind of postmodern, which is everything after Titanfall, and pretty much every postmodern first-person shooter game is garbage. So, except for Titanfall and Titanfall 2. I'm not sure if Duke Nukem is in that boomer or medieval era. I just say medieval because I can't think of another term. I could probably say classic, like classical first-person shooter game. Classical basically being any first-person shooter that's in a 3D environment, but does not use the twin-stick control scheme. Pretty much GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. So I'll just get the other Duke Nukem game I have. Duke Nukem 64, of course. This is basically a port of Duke Nukem, but for the 64. I believe it may have some. Maybe I'm thinking of the Doom port for the Game Boy Advance, but I think there is some. I think there may be some exclusive content for the 64 version, but I'm not certain. This game is definitely a boomer shooter because I have played a bit of it. I think you can look up and down though, which does make a really big difference. You can actually look up. You're not. I don't think you're restricted to left and right. Viewing, I should say. Other parts of it make me think that yes, it is indeed a boomer shooter because it all takes place technically on one plane. Like, yes, you do go upstairs and go downstairs, but you never go under a floor, which is a big characteristic of boomer shooters. Here we go. It's Donkey Kong 64. You know him well. He's finally back to kick some tail. And yes, that is where this is the home of the DK rap. This is a mascot platformer, and but it's Donkey Kong, of course, and I have not played really any of these rare platformer games, to be totally honest with you. This does kind of make me wish, though, that DK has had more games come out on more systems, especially platforming games, because even though I'm not a big fan of Donkey Kong Country, I still really like Donkey Kong the character and kind of the universe that he's in. So I do wish that Nintendo would kind of dust off the old Kong here and make some new Donkey Kong games. The final DK, I just spoiled it there. The final D game I have is another Donkey Kong universe game. It's Donkey Kong Racing. I have not played this game. This game I actually got recently. So I don't really know anything about it, but I hear only good things about it, so that's interesting. This Rare was very much the king of the Nintendo 64. Probably, I would say at least a third of my Nintendo 64 collection are Rareware games. At least a third of them. Next is the letter F, and I only have one game, but it is a exceptional game, and it's F-Zero X. This is the only F-Zero game I have in my entire collection. This is a really, really awesome racing game. The fact that there's random generation of tracks in this game is just really cool as well. That's just so cool. My main experience with racing games is the Mario Kart games, but I really want to play more of this game because, well, first of all, I main as Captain Falcon in Super Smash Brothers, and this is F-Zero is the home of Captain Falcon. Next in my collection is a game starting with the letter J, and I'm going to give you a second to think about which game that might be. Okay, you had your second. It is James Bond 007 GoldenEye. Some people categorize this in like as a G game or as a like starting with a number, but it is James Bond 007 GoldenEye. So I always categorize my James Bond games under the J category. I talked about this game a bit in my PS2 collection video, saying that basically, in summary, I was not very impressed with the local multiplayer. But I have not given the single player a chance. I have not played the single player, and from what I understand, that's really where this game shines. This is definitely one of the defining games on the Nintendo 64, and it's also the most prevalent first-person shooter game on the Nintendo 64, and it's also made by Rare. This would be in my classical category of first-person shooter games. I genuinely believe that if the Nintendo 64 had more than one analog stick, then Rareware probably would have figured out the twin stick formula for first-person shooters before Halo Combat Evolved did. Really, Halo Combat Evolved kind of owes its success to the fact that the Xbox controller had two analog sticks. And who knows, maybe that's why they put two analog sticks on the Xbox controller to begin with, is specifically for Halo Combat Evolved. I think it was inevitable that somebody would have figured that out, the twin stick formula. Like I said, I think if the Nintendo 64 had two analog sticks, then it's very possible that Perfect Dark or some other first-person shooter game could very well have used dual stick controls. I have one game for the letter L, and I wish I had two of them. I'm gonna also let you guess which game it is, and I'll give you a hint. It's a Legend of Zelda game. And I know that's not a very good hint because that narrows it down to two. And before I said that, you probably already guessed it was a Legend of Zelda game. And the Legend of Zelda game I have is Majora's Mask. It is the gold cart with the holographic label. You can see it moving and grooving. I have played Ocarina of Time on my 3DS. I have Ocarina of Time 3D, and I gotta say, I prefer Ocarina of Time over Majora's Mask. And I think one reason why is because the time limit in this game really stresses me out. I really like to take games at my own pace. I only I only like to speedrun them after I've played through them once, at least once. I just find time limits to be a very arbitrary restriction on the player. And if I were to ever design a game, especially one that's more open-ended like a Legend of Zelda game, I probably would not add that time restriction unless it's for like a specific objective, like a very small objective. But so I don't really have much else to comment on the game itself, but I do have something to comment about this cartridge. This is about the third gold card of Majora's Mask that I've seen, and I think the gold plastic is a lot more brittle than the typical gray plastic that was used on Nintendo 64 cartridges. And the reason why, take a look there and see if you see anything that's out of place. Right there, right here, where I'm pointing with my middle finger. I bought this game and it was already broken on that connection there, that like little plastic connection. So I took apart the cartridge, it was rattling, and this cartridge still rattles just a little bit. But it was rattling a lot because there was, of course, broken plastic on the inside. So I took it apart and I extracted that piece of plastic. But now really the only thing that's holding it together are the screws. All three, I've seen 3 totally different copies from 3 totally different places of this game. And all 3 copies have the exact same problem of one of these plastic bits here breaking off. So I think that there is a fault with the plastic that was used for this cartridge. So if you have this game, if you have a copy of this game, handle it with extreme care. Next is the letter M, and I have one game for the letter M, but I have 2 copies of it. And it is Mario Kart 64. Here is the first copy. Here is my second copy. Well, why do I have 2 copies? My collection is getting, and I'm not talking about my Nintendo 64 collection. I'm talking about my entire collection spanning all of my consoles, which is quite a bit. If you don't write down what you have in some sort of spreadsheet or database or notes or whatever, you are very likely to buy a second copy of a game, and it has happened to me at least 3 or 4 times. I bought my second copy of this game when I first was stricken with my illness, so my head wasn't in the right place. I hadn't traded it in, partly because, well, it's a pretty valuable game, so why not hang on to it? But I also have a friend who has just recently gotten into Nintendo 64 collecting, which I kind of feel sorry for him because this is a really bad time to get into Nintendo 64 collecting, but it may never get better. So I'll probably just give one of these copies to him. That's what I'm planning on, at least. Talking about the game, I've played quite a bit of this game. My favorite Mario Kart game is Double Dash for the GameCube. And there's a couple reasons why. First of all, the controls are just so responsive and so good. The tracks are really good. Just the soundtrack is really good. And the one thing that really sets Double Dash out from the rest is, of course, its double feature, like it's like 2 characters per cart feature, which I never understood why Nintendo never at least didn't make that as an option in newer Mario Kart games, but I'm going to save that conversation for my GameCube video. This game is probably my second most played Mario Kart game, coming from Double Dash, because Double Dash was my first Mario Kart game. Mario Kart 64 admittedly feels fairly outdated. I think the biggest issue I have with it, and this isn't just an issue with Mario Kart 64, but it's an issue with Super Mario Kart as well, and it is the fact that if you get lower than 4th place, then you have to restart, which you have to restart that one track, which I think is very silly. They got rid of that in Double Dash, so if you do poorly on one track, but you do great on the other 3 or on the other however many tracks there are in the cup, then you still move on, you still progress. Mario Kart 64 is an interesting hybrid between the old, like, Mode 7 Super Mario Kart style and then the more modern Mario Kart Double Dash and Mario Kart Wii, where it's in a 3D environment, because Mario Kart 64 does indeed take place in an environment, but a lot of the objects, including the characters, are still sprites, which is really interesting. It's a really interesting case there. Other than that, I really don't have too much to say about Mario Kart 64, and I kind of wish I had. I feel like I need a bit more experience with it. Moving on with the letter P, I have a couple of games. I have a few games for the letter P. The first one is, I am very fortunate to have this game, Paper Mario, and I was very fortunate to get it for free. I have a friend that I believe they're originally from Chicago, but I know them from Alaska because I've lived in Alaska for several years, and they no longer live in Alaska, but they moved back to Chicago. But I got talking to their spouse, and I believe that he was some sort of owner of a retro video game store, possibly in the Chicago area. I'm not 100% certain about that. During Christmas one year, I got a package in the mail. It was a gift from them, and this was the game that was in that package, and it also included a Wavebird controller for the GameCube, which is also not that easy to come by in itself either. So that kind of blew me away, and I wrote them a thank you letter. I don't know if it ever got to them because I never heard back, but I'm kind of sad that I never really given this game the chance to play it, because I love RPG games. From what I understand, Paper Mario is an RPG. I'm just kind of not in a place where I can play it right now, so maybe with some time I'll be able to play it. It also brings up the 1,000-Year Door for the GameCube. That's one game that I definitely need to pick up for the GameCube. However, it's probably worth at least $100 at this point. I don't know what this game is worth, though. I'm sure it's not a very cheap game to get, though. So there's Paper Mario. By the way, that Christmas Story was probably 4 or 5 years ago, so the value was a lot cheaper than it is now. So at the time, it still kind of shocked me, just because, even then, especially a Wavebird GameCube controller is kind of, that's a really nice thing to have. The next P game I have is, I think, what probably should be the defining first-person shooter game on the Nintendo 64, but I think GoldenEye was just a lot more popular and a lot more people had it, but the game I'm talking about is Perfect Dark. And when I brought up first-person shooter games in the letter P category, you probably were like, yeah, it's going to be Perfect Dark. This game, just like pretty much most games in my collection, I have not been able to play yet. But I really love to watch playthroughs of it. I like to watch speedruns. Same thing with GoldenEye 64. I think in my PS2 video, I kind of said that I really kind of enjoy watching people play GoldenEye more than I enjoy playing it. I still love to have these games though, partly because I do like to play them from time to time. The reason I don't play them more is just because of my health. I find it really difficult to focus on certain things. Making videos like this it's necessary, but it's necessary for my healing process. I don't know if I'm ever going to heal from it, but making these videos kind of wears me out. But Perfect Dark, from what I do know about it, it's very much, it plays like GoldenEye, but far more refined. There's a lot more improvements to it. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure Perfect Dark started as a James Bond game, but Rare couldn't or didn't want to renew the rights to James Bond, so they ended up just making their own IP. So it's still very much like an espionage game from what I understand, and it takes place in kind of it's kind of sci-fi, but I guess the best word to describe it is cyberpunk. I think I've heard people describe it like that. It's not like Aliens like Halo is, or it's not like post-apocalyptic sci-fi like Fallout is. It is the best word to describe it, the subgenre of sci-fi of Perfect Dark is cyberpunk, and I know a lot of people really love that subgenre, so if you are into cyberpunk and you were disappointed with Cyberpunk 2077, or if you want a different kind of cyberpunk experience, then maybe Perfect Dark is a game that you should look into. I think that there is a new Perfect Dark project that Microsoft is working on, because Rareware is owned by Microsoft. They've been owned by Microsoft since like 2001, and Microsoft has just kind of put them in a grave. Like they haven't let Rare do anything other than like develop Xbox Live avatars, which is incredibly sad, because talk about probably the most prevalent game developer of the late 1990s. Even though they developed for a system that wasn't like that popular, it was popular, but it wasn't like PlayStation. But you know, given the notoriety of Rareware in the 1990s, it's really sad the path that Microsoft kind of led Rareware down. But now I don't know, it seems like I hear that the new Perfect Dark project is having troubles, like a troubled development. I have no idea though. That's Perfect Dark for you. Out of all of the games that I haven't played that I am wanting to play, this is probably the one I'm most excited about. Again, this is kind of your classical, what I described earlier, this is one of your classical first-person shooter games. The next P game I have, I believe that this is the most recent game in my collection. I got this game for Christmas this last Christmas, and it's Pilot Wing 64. And I have not had a chance to play it. I love the soundtrack, though. I've listened to the soundtrack quite a bit. I love the soundtrack. I don't know exactly what this game. I know it's kind of like a flight simulator, but is it? I don't know. So that interests me. The only issue I have with this is that the label has a few stains on it, so I may look for a better copy of it, but it's still a pretty decent copy. So, I don't have too much to comment on this game, but except for the fact that you could kind of say that this may be the predecessor or whatever to what is it, Wii Sports Resort Flying, which I've spent many hours on. I love Wii Sports Resort, the plane flying in that game. It's so good. And I believe that the flying part of Wii Sports Resort got a re-release on the 3DS, and it's called Pilot Wings Resort, which is awesome, but at the same time is kind of a wasted potential, which is really kind of Nintendo games these days, just kind of wasted potential. What I mean by that is like the new Mario Strikers game and the new like the Wii Sports for the Switch is just very underwhelming, which is really sad to say, but I feel like Pilot Wings Resort for the 3DS was kind of a wasted potential, because why limit the game to still just the one island? I feel like they could have made like more places that we could fly. 3D modeling is really not that hard, especially if you have the resources like Nintendo, so I don't know why they didn't do that, but I'm not really talking about the 64, am I? That's because really honestly I don't have that much to say about the 64 version, so we'll move on. The next two P games I have, I'm going to lump together kind of as one, and by saying that you probably guessed which games I'm talking about. It's Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Stadium 2. I was able to get these games really cheap before prices went all the way up back at Tolly's in West Jefferson before they closed, and they were really they were nice enough to bundle the transfer pack with it. So, I'm pretty sure the transfer pack is required to play Pokemon Stadium. So, the transfer pack was bundled with copies of Pokemon Stadium back in the day. Pokemon Stadium is really cool because you can transfer your Pokemon from your Game Boy games over to the Nintendo 64 and see them in 3D. That being said, I haven't really played Pokemon Stadium, and part of the reason why is because I'm really not that big of a fan of the mainline Pokemon games. I find the Mystery Dungeon games to be so much better. Just leaps and bounds better than the mainline games. I have seen quite a bit of gameplay, though, on Pokemon Stadium. Not necessarily Pokemon Stadium 2. By the way, this is actually normal. This was something I was kind of confused about when I got the game. I was like, is this back shell a replacement? No, this is actually what every cartridge looks like. There's a gold front and then a gray back shell. So Pokemon Stadium, by the way, I think it's really funny and interesting that they put like a label there for you to write your name on, which I'm really glad to say that I have not seen a whole lot of copies of Pokemon Stadium where people have actually written on this game belongs to. People were smart, I guess, enough not to do that. And it's something really interesting that you never see anymore, or that you don't, not even anymore, but you just don't see ever, is like a label, like a little space for you to write your name. So I assume that maybe they thought that people were going to play this game, like bring it over, like more so than other games, which is funny that Nintendo would allow people to have fun in their own way. since Nintendo doesn't seem like they like people to have fun if it's not their type of fun. But one more thing I wanted to say about this game. Gameplay I have seen of it, this probably has to be one of the best looking Nintendo 64 games, and that's partly because from what I know, it's entirely enclosed in a stadium, and they're able to just put all of the detail on the Pokemon models. So they don't really have to put like so much computational power towards rendering an environment or necessarily rendering collisions or anything, because it's still turn-based and all that stuff, like the Game Boy games. It's just kind of in 3D. So they're able to put a lot of detail into the 3D models of the Pokemon. So that's why I say that this is probably one of the better looking Nintendo 64 games. That was the final P game I have, so the next letter is the letter S. The first S game I have to show you is Star Fox 64. Now that I think about it, I actually have played this game a bit before I owned a Nintendo 64, because the church that I went to had both an original Xbox and Nintendo 64, and this was one of the Nintendo 64 games they had there, and I remember playing Star Fox 64 quite a bit. I don't know why I didn't remember that in the intro, but I really like Star Fox. It's cool. I don't know. I don't really know what else to say about it, but there's my copy of it. I do wish that Star Fox had a little bit more love, kind of like Donkey Kong from Nintendo, to really, and F-Zero, even like especially F-Zero, man. F-Zero has just been kicked to the curb apparently by Nintendo, but I just noticed that some of these games have player choice thing on it, so I am sure that there's a different copy that doesn't have that player's choice emblem on it right there. So that's something to look out for. The next S game I have, which is the first Star Wars game, and it's the one I mentioned in the intro. It's Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. This is probably the most beaten up N64 game I have. It's just not in the best condition. There's somebody's initials on the back, has a GameStop sticker, which is always kind of interesting to see. This back when GameStop had N64 games in circulation, but there's also just a lot of scratches and kind of some discoloration. You can see right there between the front and the back shell, there's discoloration on the back shell, and that's not normal. So I'll definitely need to look for maybe a better copy of this game, but this game is it's really interesting because it is so fast-paced, and it's kind of a miracle that the Nintendo 64 was able to render things so fast, but also that probably has to do with the fact that this is like solid state media and not a disc that has to be spun. So that probably has something to do with it, but this is probably the fastest racing game I have played. Now F-Zero might be faster, but man, is this fast. Based on the Phantom Menace, yeah, I mean, it's pod racing. I haven't tried spinning though in it, which is something I have to do. I believe I have 3 Star Wars games. This is the second one, and it's Star Wars Rogue Squadron. You can get this game on Steam on PC, because I also have the Steam version. This game also has 2 sequels on the GameCube. This is a really good just X-Wing simulator game. Just like Star Wars Starfighter is a good Naboo starfighter simulator. But it's on the Nintendo 64, and it has those good Nintendo 64 old graphics on it. I really love the charm of Nintendo 64's primitive graphics, and Star Wars is one of my favorite IPs from anything of all time, so I really like seeing a bunch of the Star Wars stuff kind of come to life with the old Nintendo 64 graphics. The final Star Wars game I have, for some reason, I don't want to say that these aren't the only 3 Star Wars games. This one is Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, and this game I'm 99% sure you can also get on Steam on PC, and I want to say that this is a boomer shooter. So I don't know if I'm thinking of a different game or if my memory's just wrong on this, but from what I remember, there's like a boomer shooter game that takes place during the original movies, and then there's one where you follow kind of like a rebel smuggler that's basically a ripoff of Han Solo, and some of the levels are funky, and I don't know if that's this game or not. I don't know. Somebody might be able to tell me and kind of say how wrong I am and how I need to play these games to really know what I'm talking about, but I know I don't know. My memories with this game in particular, my memory's just kind of all over the place. We'll move on to the next S game. This is the final Star Wars game I have, but like I said, I do not think that these 3 that I showed off are the only Star Wars games. I have a feeling that there are more of them, but I just can't think of them. The next game I have is Spider-Man in its red cartridge. Admittedly, I don't know a lot about this game, but I know that a lot of people like to compare it to the PS2 Spider-Man games. And I don't know if it's necessarily a fair comparison, because the Spider-Man 2 for the PS2, as I said in my PlayStation 2 video, is like just like the definitive Spider-Man game. At least up until recently it was. And I don't really know how this game compares. Unfortunately, my copy has like 3 or 4 GameStop. They're obviously like old GameStop stickers on the back. And unfortunately, one is put on this label back here, so I'm going to try my best to get these stickers off without causing too much damage to the cartridge, which I think I'll be able to do. But we'll see. So there's Spider-Man on the Nintendo 64, made by Activision. It's always kind of interesting seeing their name on old games, especially Atari games, but because that's when Activision got their start. But I don't know, it's just interesting. The next S game I have is possibly the worst game on the Nintendo 64. Possibly one of the worst games of all time, and it's Superman 64. Now, that's actually not the official title of this game, and I can't tell you what the official title of the game is. It's called like Superman : 2 dots and then something else, but I just can't think of it right now. And it would probably help if the title of the game was actually on the label, because, you know, that's what labels are for, but they decided not to put the title on the label for whatever reason. As you can see, this used to be a Blockbuster rental game, based on these decals here, which is really funny because I wouldn't imagine a lot of people would want to rent this game, but maybe they didn't know what was in store for them. But that's part of the reason why I got this copy, was just for the Blockbuster, property of Blockbuster decals on it. kind of a timepiece. Now, you could argue that the GameStop stickers are kind of a timepiece as well, but I don't know. Blockbuster is a little bit, I feel like, a little bit more interesting, and also I actually don't think I would be able to get these stickers off without causing actual damage to the cartridge. So yeah, pretty much everything that can be said about this game has been said about this game, because it's just so bad. So we'll move on to the final S game. And the final S game, of course, is the one and only Super Mario 64. I love this game. I've beaten it several times, gotten all 120 stars. I mean, it's just, it's just one of those games. A lot of people say that it is not aged well. Well, I would partly agree with that, but I feel like it's the epitome of old school. Like, there's a difference between outdated and old school. And something that's outdated is something that's not fun to play, but something that is old school is something that is fun to play. Something that probably wouldn't be made today. Games like Super Mario 64 are games that only could have come out during its time, and but it's still really fun to play. So it's definitely an old school game. It's not outdated, it's old school. A lot of people like to complain about the camera, and I partly agree with that, but I feel like if you've played this game enough, you should be used to the camera, and you should be able to predict how it moves and stuff. The really funny thing about this game is a lot of people talk about how liminal it is. Mario 64 is a liminal space, and every copy is personalized. Well, I would say that couldn't be any more true than my situation, because like I said in the intro, my only experience with playing Nintendo 64 growing up was Super Mario 64 and Turok, and there was probably a decent 15 years where I didn't even play a Nintendo 64. So, it had been a very long time since I had played this game, and as you can imagine, my memory of it was very different, just because it had been so long since I've played it. I think in my case it's an interesting study of certain things you remember, and I remember this game looking a lot different than when I picked it back up in 2016, 2017. So like I said, before 2016, 2017, I probably hadn't played this game in, I don't know, 15 years. In the last few years, I've played this game a lot, and I've beaten it a lot, and I gotta say, I mean, it's just a game that some people will disagree with me, but I say that it just holds up, and there's a reason why it has a strong community behind it. It's just really cool to see ROM hacks for it and to see the PC port of it. I really should download the PC port, because I have the ROM, so I can do it, and I'll do it to spite Nintendo, because I don't care what they think. I get all of my ROMs legally, and I don't know why they have a problem with that. Yeah, I mean, I just, what is there to say about this game that hasn't already been said? It's just incredible game that has gone down in history and will continue to go down in history as just incredible. I mean, what can I say about it? So I'll just move on to the letter T. The first game I have for the letter T is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and it's blue cartridge. It's really cool to see cartridges in different colors. This is an Activision game. I did not grow up playing this version. I grew up playing the PlayStation 1 version over at my friend's house, and I do own 2 copies of this game for the PlayStation 1. and I haven't really played far enough into the game to really be able to judge the different versions, compare the different versions, but just based on the main menu, you can tell that the Nintendo 64 version of this game is compromised compared to the PlayStation 1. I believe this game is, I think I have this game for Sega Dreamcast as well. I'm pretty sure this game was on Sega Dreamcast. And the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 1 version, when you're on the main menu, the music has a far longer loop. Not the case for the Nintendo 64 version. The music, the loop on the main menu for this game, for the Nintendo 64 version, is a very short loop. Like, stupidly short, like a 5-second loop. And it gets maddening to listen to pretty quickly. The other sad part about the loop is that the loop cuts off before it gets to the really good bassy part of it. For the N64 version, you just get like the first part of it where it's record scratching, and I love record scratching. Record scratching is really cool, but on the PS1 version and Dreamcast version, it goes into like this really nice bass guitar riff. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Tony Hawk definitely defined a generation, and I believe that this is the first Tony Hawk game that really existed. I believe that this was kind of later into the N64 lifespan. If I had to guess, this game probably came out around 1999 or 2000, 2001 at the latest, but I can't imagine that. Considering that I'm pretty sure this game came out on the Dreamcast, and the Dreamcast came out in 1999, so yeah, this birthed a whole franchise of games, going from Pro Skater to Underground to American Wasteland, and so on. The next game I have in the T category is the game that I was talking about in the intro, and it's Turok Dinosaur Hunter. If I had to guess, this would have been the first-person shooter game I had ever played. Except, and I mentioned this in my PS2 video, if you consider Descent for the PC, as in, like, I'm pretty sure that game is by Interplay. Back in the day, my family had like an old Windows 95 computer. I used to play Ski Free and Descent by Interplay on that computer. And if you can, I would consider Descent a first-person shooter game. So technically Descent would have been my first-person shooter game, but if you don't count that, this Turok would be Turok Dinosaur Hunter. This is an Acclaim game. Again, this was a fairly prevalent series in the late 90s, early 2000s. This had the Turok games. I'm pretty sure there's at least 3 of them on the Nintendo 64. There's Turok Evolution on the GameCube. And then there's been like at least one reboot of Turok. I want to say during like the 7th generation, perhaps. Either the 7th or the 8th generation had a reboot of Turok. I really honestly have not played this game in probably close to 12, no, longer than that. Probably close to 17 years I have not played this game, so honestly, my memory is very low on this game, but it is a first-person shooter game, and it is I would put it in that classical first-person shooter game category because, again, it just doesn't have that twin-stick control, but it takes place in a true 3D environment. And this one, then this is Turok 2: Seeds of Evil, and it has a cool black cartridge. This game, I am almost certain, has a PC port. I feel like I've seen people play this game on the PC. And I don't know if I can say the same thing about the other Turok games. this game actually starts you off with like a cutscene, which is something you don't get with the original Turok. I gotta say, it was kind of I was impressed when I booted this game up, and it's a really good looking game for the Nintendo 64, in my opinion at least. I feel like it really pushes the N64 graphically. Unfortunately, I do not have Turok 3. There is a Turok 3. I have seen like cutscenes from it, and it seems to be a pretty story-driven game based on that. There's like a scene in a house where somebody's thrown down a set of stairs or something, but that's all I can say about it. So for the next letter is W, and you probably guessed it. It's Wave Race 64. This is just, again, a pretty definitive Nintendo 64 game. There's also there's kind of a sequel to it, a follow-up on the GameCube called Wave Race Blue Storm. It's a jet skiing, racing sort of simulator game. I don't know if it's technically a simulation game, but I've played a bit of it. I haven't played it, though, in probably 5 or 6 years, so I probably couldn't tell you much about it, but yeah, I definitely need to play it again. The final game in my Nintendo 64 collection, which I consider to be probably one of the more interesting games on the system, is Yoshi's Story. Let me let you see that game, see the label and stuff. Well, this is very much Yoshi's Island 2. Like, so would this technically be Super Mario World 3? I don't know. I give props to Nintendo for not just calling this Yoshi's Island 64. They actually used their imagination and they called it Yoshi's Story. This has a very cool aesthetic to it because it has like a handcrafted, like there's it looks like it's made out of cardboard. You know, it's kind of like the original one where the like Yoshi's Island kind of looks like it's drawn with crayons and stuff. Sort of. Markers, I guess, is better. And this one looks like it's made out of paper and cardboard, which is such a cool aesthetic. And this plays a lot like Yoshi's Island on the SNES. So yeah, this is a side-scrolling platformer, which is something that, you know, we didn't really have a lot of during the 5th and 6th generation because everybody was just kind of blowing their minds about 3D. Later on with the Wii, we got new Super Mario Bros. And I think, what if we got like side-scrolling Mario games on the Nintendo 64 and on the GameCube? Like, what would have that looked like? And this is probably the closest thing we can get to that. Not really, because Yoshi it's definitely its own separate beast from Mario in a lot of different ways, but that is something that I think would be really cool to see on the homebrewing scene is what a side-scrolling Mario game would look like on the Nintendo 64 and on the GameCube. And I know people have done that they've made ROM hacks of Super Mario 64 where they lock an axis where Mario can only move, but I feel like that doesn't really count. I don't know, that just kind of feels a little cheating to me, and I realize that, you know, making a game from scratch for these systems isn't something that's easy to do, but I don't know, it's just like we did have Super Mario, the Super Mario All-Stars, like Super Mario Advance on the Game Boy Advance, but again, does that really count? Probably yes, because they had their own exclusive features, but just imagine like a 2.5D side-scrolling Mario game on the GameCube or on the Nintendo 64. That would be a really interesting sight to see, I think. And again, this is likely the closest thing we have to it. By the way, I kind of forgot to mention this. I wanted to mention this. this game, for like Yoshi's representation, at least in Super Smash Bros. Melee, it really takes a lot from this game, like the Yoshi story stage from Super Smash Bros. Melee. I just wanted to bring that up. That will pretty much wrap it up for this Nintendo 64 collection video. That's all the games I have. I do want to talk about one more thing, as I always do in these video game collection videos, and that's ROM dumping. What do I use to dump my Nintendo 64 ROMs? Well, like I mentioned in some of my other videos, especially my Game Boy Advance video, I use the Retrode, and for Nintendo 64 games, you're going to need the N64 plugin. And one added feature of this is that you can connect N64 controllers, as you can see right here, and play the games live from the ROM dumper, which is something the Retrode can do. I kind of don't know why you would want to do that when you can just copy the ROM and just play it through the ROM file, but that is something you can do. You're probably going to have a lot of trouble finding a Retrode these days, because I don't think that they're in active development or being made anymore. So your best luck may be to get a Retro Blaster, which I showed off in my NES video. Those are also capable of dumping N64 games if you have the N64 extension on it. As far as compatibility between games, I don't know. There's still compatibility being added for games for the NES. I don't know if Nintendo 64 necessarily has the same issue, because with the NES cartridges, you have all these different mapping types, and maybe that's just not something that is on N64 cartridges, is having to figure out and having to mess and all this stuff with different mapper types. I'm pretty sure Retro Blaster orders are like backlogged till 2023, so you're going to have to wait a while, but that's just the one that comes to mind. You're probably going to have a lot easier of a time getting a Retro Blaster than you are getting a Retrode. That just about does it for this video. I will close it out here. Thank you for watching. This is Rich of Review Tech USA signing out. Have a horse one.